Look, I know what you're thinking. UPS driver? Really? That's your big scary story. Just wait, alright? Because what I'm about to tell you will make you think twice about every brown truck you see rolling down your street. And trust me, after 3 years delivering packages in rural East Texas, I've seen things that would make your skin crawl right off your bones. My name's Marcus, and I never planned on being a delivery driver. I had dreams, college degree in marketing, plans to work in Dallas, maybe Houston. But life has this funny way of kicking you in the teeth when you least expect it. Dad got sick, medical bills piled up, and suddenly I'm back in my hometown of Cedar Hollow, population 847, looking for any job that pays decent. That's when I saw the posting at the UPS depot in nearby Marshall. They needed drivers willing to cover the rural routes, the ones that took you deep into the piney woods where cell service cuts out and the roads turn to gravel. Pay was good, better than anything else around, which should have been my first red flag. The depot manager, Bill Hutchins, was this wiry old guy with eyes that never seemed to blink enough. When I walked into his office for the interview, he was shuffling through a stack of laminated cards like they were the most important things in the world. "You ever worked delivery before, son?" he asked, not looking up from those cards. "No, sir, but I'm a fast learner and—" "That's fine," he cut me off. "Fast learning ain't what matters out here. Following instructions is." He slid the cards across his desk, and I could see his hands were shaking slightly. "These are your survival rules. Memorize them. Follow them exactly. Don't ask questions about them." I picked up the first card, expecting some corporate nonsense about customer service. Instead, I read, Rule 1. Never deliver packages to addresses that don't exist on your GPS after 6 p.m. What the hell? I flipped to the next card. Rule 2. If a package feels unnaturally cold, wear insulated gloves and avoid skin contact. This had to be some kind of joke. I looked up at Bill, but his expression was dead serious. Actually, more than serious. The guy looked scared. "Mr. Hutchins, these rules are unusual. What exactly am I delivering?" "Packages," he said flatly. "That's all you need to know." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But let me tell you something, Marcus. The last 3 drivers who didn't follow these rules, they ain't delivering anything anymore." "What happened to them?" Bill's eye twitched. "Tony Martinez quit after 2 weeks. Said the job was making him sick, having nightmares, losing weight. Sarah Chin lasted a month before she just stopped showing up. Found her truck abandoned on Farm Road 1156, engine still running, driver's door wide open. Sarah was gone. Never found her. And Jake." Bill paused, staring at something behind me. Jake thought he was smart, thought the rules were stupid. Started opening packages, delivering to places he shouldn't have. We found him 3 days later, sitting in his truck outside the Henderson place, just staring straight ahead. Wouldn't respond to anything. State took him to the psychiatric facility up in Tyler. Last I heard, he was still catatonic. My skin was crawling, but I needed this job. Dad's treatment wasn't going to pay for itself. "These rules," I said, holding up the cards, "they're for real. Real as cancer, son. You follow them exactly, you'll be fine. You get creative, you get curious." He shrugged. "Well, we'll be interviewing for your replacement." I took the job. The rules themselves seemed like something out of a bad horror movie. Rule 1. Never deliver packages to addresses that don't exist on your GPS after 6 p.m. Rule 2. If a package feels unnaturally cold, wear insulated gloves and avoid skin contact. Rule 3. Never deliver packages that make sounds from inside. Rule 4. If you arrive at a delivery address and no buildings exist, leave immediately. Rule 5. Never enter a customer's home, even if invited. Rule 6. If a package is addressed to someone who died more than a year ago, return it to depot. Rule 7. Never deliver packages during a new moon. Rule 8. If you see children playing in yards where no children live, do not stop your truck. My first day, I figured these were just the paranoid ramblings of people who'd spent too much time alone in the woods. Rural Texas can mess with your head, especially when you're driving those long, empty roads where the trees press in close and you can go 20 miles without seeing another soul. My route covered about 100 square miles of East Texas pine forest, scattered with tiny communities that barely qualified as towns. Places like Uncertain, Karnak, and Deadwood that existed more as clusters of mobile homes and hunting camps than actual municipalities. The kind of places where everybody knows everybody, and strangers are noticed immediately. My truck was loaded with the usual stuff: Amazon packages, auto parts, medical supplies. Normal deliveries to normal people, or so I thought. The GPS worked fine for the first few stops, guiding me to trailers and farmhouses where people were expecting their packages and happy to see me. It was around 4 p.m. when things started getting weird. I was delivering a package to an address on Piney Creek Road when my GPS suddenly cut out. The screen went black, then flickered back to life, showing a completely different route than what I'd been following. According to the display, I was on Old Mill Road, but the street sign clearly said Piney Creek. I chalked it up to poor satellite reception. Happens all the time in heavy woods. I found the address manually, delivered the package to a friendly elderly woman who offered me sweet tea, and got back on route. That's when I noticed the package. It was sitting in the back of my truck, a medium-sized box addressed to R. Henderson, 1247 Deadwood Trail, Uncertain, Texas. The weird thing was, I didn't remember loading it. It wasn't on my delivery manifest, and the address didn't exist in my GPS system. The package felt wrong in my hands. Not damaged or poorly packed, just wrong. Like it was heavier than it should be, and the cardboard felt strangely warm despite the cold October air. I checked my watch. 4:30 p.m. Rule 1 said not to deliver to non-existent addresses after 6 p.m., but I still had time. The smart thing would have been to take it back to the depot, but I was new and wanted to prove I could handle my route efficiently. Deadwood Trail turned out to be less of a trail and more of a suggestion. 2 ruts in the dirt that wound deep into the pines, branches scraping against my truck as I navigated around potholes that could swallow a small car. My radio crackled with static, and my cell phone showed no signal. After 20 minutes of driving, I found 1247. It was a cabin, if you could call it that. More like a shack that had been patched together from mismatched lumber and rusted tin. The porch sagged under the weight of accumulated junk, old appliances, broken furniture, stacks of newspapers yellow with age. Kudzu vines had claimed most of the structure, wrapping around the walls and crawling through broken windows. The place looked abandoned, but there was a light on inside, a flickering yellowish glow that danced behind grimy windows. I grabbed the package, noticing again how warm it felt, and walked up to what I assumed was the front door. No doorbell, so I knocked. "Package delivery," I called out. Silence. Then footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps that seemed to take forever to reach the door. The door opened, and I found myself face to face with a man who looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. Pale skin stretched tight over sharp bones, eyes so deep in their sockets they looked like holes in his skull. He was thin, unnaturally thin, like something had been slowly consuming him from the inside. "R. Henderson?" I asked. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the package in my hands. When he reached for it, I noticed his fingers were stained black, like he'd been handling charcoal. "Been waiting for this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Been waiting so long." He took the package, and the moment it left my hands, I felt a wave of relief I couldn't explain. Like I'd just gotten rid of something toxic. "Have a good day," I said, backing away from the door. But Henderson wasn't paying attention to me anymore. He was staring at the package with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His fingers traced the edges of the box, and I could swear I heard him whispering to it. I got back to my truck as fast as I could and drove away, branches whipping against my windshield as I navigated the rutted trail back to the main road. In my rearview mirror, I could see the yellowish light from Henderson's cabin flickering through the trees, and for just a moment, it looked like the light was moving. The rest of my route was normal. Regular deliveries to regular people who signed for their packages and wished me a good day. By the time I got back to the depot, I'd almost convinced myself that Henderson was just an eccentric old hermit who was happy to get whatever weird stuff he ordered online. Bill was waiting for me in the parking lot, his face tight with concern. "How'd it go?" he asked, but his eyes were scanning my truck like he was looking for damage. "Fine," I said. "Had one delivery that wasn't in my GPS, but I found the address and got it delivered." Bill's face went pale. "What address?" 1247 Deadwood Trail. "Package for R. Henderson." "Jesus Christ," Bill muttered, running his hands through his hair. "You delivered to Henderson?" "Yeah, why?" He seemed harmless enough. Bill stared at me for a long moment, like he was trying to decide whether to fire me on the spot or call an ambulance. "Marcus," he said slowly, "Robert Henderson died 3 years ago. House burned down with him in it." Nothing left but the foundation. I felt my stomach drop. That's impossible. I just delivered a package to him. Talked to him face to face. What did he look like? I described the pale, thin man who'd answer the door. Bill's expression grew more troubled with each detail. That's him, he said quietly. That's exactly what Henderson looked like before he died. Down to the black stains on his fingers. He was a metal worker. Always had grease under his nails. But I saw him. I talked to him. He took the package. Bill pulled out his phone and showed me a satellite image of Deadwood Trail. Where I'd seen Henderson's cabin, there was nothing but a concrete foundation surrounded by burned trees. This photo was taken last week, he said. Same as it's looked for 3 years. I stared at the image, my mind reeling. But I was there. I saw the cabin, the porch, the light inside. He answered the door. Rule 6, Bill said, tapping one of the laminated cards. Never deliver packages to someone who died more than a year ago. You should have brought it back. But how was I supposed to know he was dead? The package was addressed to him. It had a real address. The address didn't exist in your GPS, did it? I thought back. He was right. The GPS had shown nothing for that address. Marcus, Bill said, his voice gentle but firm, you need to understand something. This job isn't just about delivering packages. Some of the things we carry, they're not meant for the living. And some of the people we deliver to, they're not exactly people anymore. Over the next few weeks, I learned that East Texas has a long history of strange occurrences. Native American burial grounds, Civil War battlefields, old settlements that disappeared overnight for reasons nobody talks about. The pine forests hide things that don't want to be found, and sometimes those things need deliveries. My second encounter with the rules came on a Tuesday. I was delivering medical supplies to a clinic in Marshall when I picked up a package that felt like it had been sitting in a freezer. The label read, Mrs. K. Sawyer, 445 Lost Creek Lane, Carthage, Texas. Rule 2. If a package feels unnaturally cold, wear insulated gloves and avoid skin contact. I grabbed the heavy work gloves from my cab and handled the package carefully. Even through the insulation, I could feel the intense cold radiating from whatever was inside. The box was covered in condensation despite the warm afternoon air. Lost Creek Lane was another dirt road that wound deep into the woods. The address turned out to be a well-maintained farmhouse with a neat yard and flower gardens. Very normal looking, except for the fact that every plant in the garden was dead. Not dormant for winter dead. Black, withered stems and leaves that crumbled at the slightest touch. Mrs. Sawyer answered the door immediately, like she'd been watching for me. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes, but when she smiled, her breath came out in visible puffs despite the 80-degree weather. Oh, wonderful, she said, reaching for the package. I've been waiting for this. I need to keep the gloves on, I said, not sure why I felt compelled to explain. Of course, dear. Very wise. Her voice carried an undertone that sounded like wind through icicles. When she took the package, frost immediately began forming on the cardboard surface. She cradled it against her chest like a baby, completely unbothered by the cold. Thank you so much, she said. This will help with my condition. I hope you feel better, I said, backing away from the door. Oh, I feel wonderful. Haven't felt this alive in years. As I walked back to my truck, I heard the sound of the package being opened. The temperature around me dropped at least 20 degrees, and my breath started coming out in clouds. When I looked back at the house, frost was spreading across the windows like living ice. I drove away quickly, and by the time I reached the main road, the temperature had returned to normal. But I couldn't shake the image of Mrs. Sawyer's smile, or the way her eyes had reflected the light like ice crystals. Bill was less surprised by this encounter. Sawyer's been getting those deliveries for 5 years now, he said. Ever since her husband died in that hunting accident. Something about maintaining her core temperature. What's in the packages? Don't know, don't want to know. As long as she pays the shipping charges and doesn't cause trouble, we deliver what she orders. But she's not normal, is she? Bill looked at me with the expression of someone who'd given up trying to define normal years ago. Marcus, out here in the woods, normal is relative. As long as Mrs. Sawyer stays on her property and doesn't bother the neighbors, what she does with her packages isn't our concern. It was becoming clear that my job involved more than just delivering packages. I was part of a supply chain that served entities and individuals who existed on the edges of what most people would consider reality. The rules weren't arbitrary safety measures, They were survival instructions for dealing with customers who operated by different laws than the rest of us. Rule 3 came into play the following week when I found a package in my truck that was making sounds. Not mechanical sounds, like something electronic switching on and off. These were organic sounds, scratching, like fingernails on cardboard, and occasionally what sounded almost like whimpering. The address was for a place called Sanctuary Road, which my GPS claimed didn't exist. It was getting close to 6 p.m., so according to Rule 1, I should have returned the package to the depot. But the sounds were getting louder, more urgent, and something about them made me feel like whatever was inside needed help. I found Sanctuary Road anyway, a narrow path that led to a compound of buildings surrounded by a high wooden fence. The sign at the gate read, New Eden Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. A woman in her 40s met me at the gate. She had the weathered look of someone who spent most of her time outdoors, and her hands were covered in small scars. "You must be the new driver," she said. "I'm Dr. Patricia Voss. Is that my delivery?" The scratching sounds were clearly audible now, and Dr. Voss's expression grew concerned. "How long has it been making noise?" she asked. "About an hour." "What's inside?" "Something that shouldn't have been in transit this long." She took the package carefully, her experienced hands seeming to calm whatever was inside. The scratching stopped immediately. "Dr. Voss, what kind of rehabilitation do you do here?" She looked at me for a long moment, weighing how much to tell me. "We care for animals that most people wouldn't understand. Creatures that exist in the spaces between what science accepts and what actually lives in these woods." Over the following months, I learned that Dr. Voss ran a sanctuary for cryptid species, animals that officially didn't exist but had been quietly living in the East Texas forest for generations. Packages addressed to her facility usually contained medical supplies, specialized food, or occasionally injured creatures that needed her expertise. The scratching package had contained a wounded juvenile creature that looked like a cross between a raccoon and something much more intelligent. Dr. Voss never told me exactly what it was, but I watched her release it back into the woods after a few weeks of recovery, and the way it looked back at me before disappearing into the trees suggested it understood more than any normal animal should. Each rule violation taught me something new about the hidden ecosystem I'd become part of. The job wasn't just about delivering packages, it was about maintaining a delicate balance between the normal world and the strange realities that existed just beyond the edge of most people's perception. But the real test of the rules was yet to come, and when it did, I learned exactly why 3 previous drivers had either quit, disappeared, or lost their minds entirely. The package that would change everything arrived on a Thursday in November, just as the first real cold front was moving through East Texas. It was addressed to the collective 13 Morning Dove Circle, Uncertain, Texas, and from the moment I loaded it into my truck, I knew it was different from anything I delivered before. For one thing, it was moving, not just shifting around like loose contents inside a box. This thing was deliberately moving, pulsing like a heartbeat, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that made my skin crawl. Worse than that, it was warm, not the pleasant warmth of Mrs. Sawyer's frozen packages, but a fevered, sick heat that seemed to radiate infection. Rule 3 was clear: never deliver packages that make sounds from inside. But this package wasn't making sounds, it was moving. None of the rules specifically covered movement, which left me in gray area territory. And gray areas, I was learning, were dangerous places to be in this job. I tried calling Bill for guidance, but my radio was picking up nothing but static. Cell service was non-existent this deep in the woods. I was on my own. The address took me deeper into the pine forest than I'd ever been before, down roads that weren't marked on any map. Morning Dove Circle turned out to be a dirt track that curved around a small lake, so remote that the water was still perfectly clear despite the industrial pollution that had clouded most East Texas waterways. 13 houses lined the circle, each one identical to the others. Small, neat cabins with wraparound porches and carefully maintained yards. The kind of place that would look idyllic in a real estate brochure, if you could ignore the fact that every single house was completely dark despite it being the middle of the afternoon. No cars in any driveways. No signs of life anywhere. Just 13 empty houses arranged around a lake that reflected the gray November sky like a mirror. I parked in front of house number 13, grabbed the moving package, and walked up to the front door. No doorbell, but there was a heavy brass knocker shaped like a raven. Before I could knock, the door opened. The woman standing there looked normal enough at first glance. Maybe 40 years old, auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt like any rural Texas resident. But her eyes were wrong. They were too bright, too focused, like she was seeing things that weren't there. "You're the new driver," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. I have a delivery for the collective." She smiled, and I noticed her teeth were perfectly white and perfectly straight. Too perfect, like dentures or veneers, but somehow worse. "We've been expecting this," she said, reaching for the package. "We've been waiting for so long." The moment she touched the box, it went completely still. Whatever had been moving inside suddenly stopped, like it had recognized her presence. "Is everything all right?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why. Something about the sudden stillness bothered me more than the movement had. "Everything is perfect now," she said, cradling the package against her chest. "Thank you for bringing our friend home." "Friend? What kind of friend gets shipped in a box?" As I walked back to my truck, I noticed movement in the windows of the other houses. Faces appearing and disappearing behind curtains, all watching me with that same too bright stare. The woman at House 13 hadn't been alone after all. The collective had been watching my entire delivery. I drove away as fast as the dirt road would allow, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I just delivered something that shouldn't have been delivered. Something that the normal world was better off without. That night, I called my dad to check on how his treatment was going. The conversation was normal enough. He was responding well to the new medication. The doctors were optimistic. But when I hung up, I realized I couldn't remember dialing his number, or picking up the phone, or deciding to call him in the first place. It was like I'd lost 10 minutes somewhere, and the only evidence that the conversation had happened was the call log on my phone. The next morning, Bill was waiting for me in the parking lot again, but this time he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was a woman I'd never seen before, tall, probably in her 50s, with silver hair, the kind of intense stare that made you feel like she was reading your thoughts. "Marcus," Bill said, "this is Dr. Elena Vasquez. She's a consultant we sometimes work with." Dr. Vasquez extended her hand, and when I shook it, her grip was surprisingly strong. "I understand you delivered a package to Morning Dove Circle yesterday." "Yes, ma'am." "Is there a problem?" "That depends." "Do you remember the delivery clearly?" "Every detail." I described the encounter, but as I talked, I realized there were gaps in my memory. I remembered the moving package, the woman at the door, the faces in the windows, but I couldn't remember what the woman had looked like beyond general details, or exactly what she'd said, or how long I'd been at the house. Dr. Vasquez nodded like this was exactly what she'd expected to hear. "Memory gaps are common after contact with a collective," she explained. "They have a way of editing experiences to make them less traumatic for outsiders." "What exactly is the collective?" She glanced at Bill, who nodded reluctantly. "They're what you might call a shared consciousness," Dr. Vasquez said. 13 individuals who gave up their individual identities to become part of something larger. They've been living around that lake for about 15 years now, completely self-sufficient, completely isolated from the outside world. That doesn't sound too dangerous. It wouldn't be, except they're not entirely human anymore. The process of joining consciousness changed them, enhanced them in some ways. They can influence memory, perception, even behavior in people who spend too much time around them. And we deliver packages to them. Occasionally, they need certain supplies to maintain their collective existence. Medical equipment, specialized foods, sometimes organic materials for their experiments. What kind of experiments? Dr. Vasquez's expression grew troubled. They're trying to expand their collective, add new members. The packages you deliver sometimes contain recruiting materials, photographs, personal items, things that help them focus their influence on potential candidates. The implications hit me like a punch to the gut. "You mean they're using our delivery service to stalk people?" "Not exactly stalking," Bill said. "More like remote evaluation. They study potential members from a distance, learning their habits, their weaknesses, their desires. When they find someone suitable, they make contact. And if someone joins them, they stop being themselves," Dr. Vasquez said simply. "They become part of the collective. Their individual personality gets absorbed into the group consciousness." I thought about the perfect teeth, the two bright eyes, the faces in the windows. How many people have they recruited? Originally, there were 5 members. Now there are 13. You do the math. 8 people had disappeared into the collective over 15 years. 8 people who'd been absorbed into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Why don't we just stop delivering to them? "Because they pay extremely well," Bill said. and because refusing to serve them might draw unwanted attention to our other unusual customers. Dr. Vasquez handed me a small silver pendant on a chain. Wear this when you're delivering in their area. It won't make you immune to their influence, but it should help you maintain your memories. The pendant was warm to the touch and covered in symbols I didn't recognize. What is it? Protection charm. Blessed by a Santeria priest in Houston who specializes in defending against collective consciousness entities. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but after 3 months of delivering packages to dead people and ice women, a protection charm seemed downright reasonable. My next encounter with the rules came 2 days later, and it was a big one. I was delivering packages in the late afternoon when I realized I was running behind schedule. The sun was setting, and I still had 3 deliveries left, including one to an address that didn't exist in my GPS. Rule 1. Never deliver packages to addresses that don't exist on your GPS after 6 p.m. It was 5:45, and the address was at least 20 minutes away down rural roads. I should have returned the package to the depot, but the customer had called the main office 3 times asking about their delivery. Bill had specifically asked me to make sure this one got through. The address was J. Blackwood, 666 Devil's Backbone Road, Karnak, Texas. Even the name should have been a red flag, but I was focused on finishing my route and getting home. Devil's Backbone Road was a narrow strip of cracked asphalt that wound through some of the densest forest I'd ever seen. The trees pressed in so close on both sides that branches scraped against my truck, and the canopy was so thick that it was already dark as night despite the lingering twilight. My headlights caught the reflective eyes of animals watching from the woods. Too many eyes, too high off the ground, too intelligent in their gaze. Whatever was living in these woods wasn't entirely natural. The address turned out to be a large Victorian mansion that had no business existing in the middle of nowhere. It was perfectly maintained, painted in deep purples and blacks, with elaborate gingerbread trim and a wraparound porch that disappeared into shadows. Warm light glowed from every window, and I could hear the faint sound of classical music drifting from inside. This was exactly the kind of place Rule 1 was designed to keep me away from. I checked my watch, 6:15 p.m. I was already in violation, but I'd come this far. Might as well finish the job. The front door was answered by a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a Victorian photograph. Tall, thin, with pale skin and dark hair slicked back with pomade. He was wearing a perfectly tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than I made in a month. "Mr. Blackwood?" I asked. "Indeed. And you must be the delivery driver." "Right on time." "On time?" I was 15 minutes late, and it was past 6 p.m. "I have a package for you, sir." "Excellent. Won't you come in? It's getting cold out there." Rule 5. Never enter a customer's home, even if invited. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to stay with my truck." His smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes. "Of course. Professional obligations." "I understand completely." He signed for the package with an ornate fountain pen, his signature flowing across the electronic pad in elaborate script. As he wrote, I noticed his fingernails were unusually long and perfectly manicured. "Tell me," he said, handing back the device, "do you enjoy your work?" "It's a job, but such an interesting job. Delivering packages to such fascinating people in such unusual places. You must see things that most people never experience." There was something hypnotic about his voice, a cadence that made me want to keep listening, keep answering his questions. "Sometimes," I said, fighting the urge to tell him everything I'd encountered over the past few months. "I imagine you've met the collective by now. Fascinating individuals. And Mrs. Sawyer with her temperature regulation issues. Dr. Voss and her rehabilitation work." My blood went cold. How did he know about my other customers? "You seem to know a lot about my route." "I know a great deal about many things. For instance, I know that you've been having strange dreams lately. Dreams about packages that move on their own, about customers who aren't quite human, about rules that seem arbitrary but save your life on a daily basis." He was right. I had been having those dreams, but I'd never told anyone about them. "How do you?" "Knowledge is my business, Marcus. I collect information the way others collect stamps or coins. And you, my friend, have become quite an interesting specimen." The way he said my name made my skin crawl. I never told him what it was. "I need to go," I said, backing toward my truck. "Of course. But before you leave, let me offer you some advice. The rules you follow, they're not just guidelines. They're a binding contract between your employers and certain interested parties. Break them too often, and the contract becomes void. What happens then? His smile revealed teeth that were too sharp and too white. Then you become available for other employment opportunities. Permanent positions with excellent benefits and no possibility of resignation. I practically ran to my truck, my hands shaking as I started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I could see Blackwood standing on his porch, watching me drive away. Even after I'd turned onto the main road and his house had disappeared behind the trees, I could still feel his eyes on me. That night, I sat in my apartment going through the rules again, trying to understand what Blackwood had meant about a binding contract. The rules weren't just safety measures, they were terms of agreement between UPS and the supernatural entities we served. Follow the rules, and we were protected. Break them too often, and we became fair game. I thought about Jake, the driver who'd ended up catatonic after getting too curious about his deliveries. About Sarah Chin, who'd disappeared completely. About Tony Martinez, who'd quit after 2 weeks claiming the job was making him sick. They'd all broken the rules, and they'd all paid the price. The next morning, Dr. Vasquez was waiting for me at the depot again. "I heard you met Blackwood," she said without preamble. "How did you know?" "He called to compliment your professionalism. Said you were much more disciplined than the previous drivers." "What is he?" "Something old. Something that's been collecting knowledge and secrets for longer than this country has existed. He's not malicious exactly, but he's not human either. And he has a particular interest in people who work the supernatural delivery routes." "Why?" "Because we see things that most people don't. We have access to information about entities and phenomena that academic researchers would kill for. To someone like Blackwood, we're valuable resources. And if I'd gone into his house," Dr. Vasquez's expression darkened, "you would have become part of his collection. Permanently." The weight of what I'd almost done hit me like a truck. I come within inches of violating Rule 5, and it would have cost me everything. "Dr. Vasquez," I said, "what exactly am I involved in here? This isn't just a delivery job, is it?" She looked around a depot, making sure we weren't being overheard, then led me to a quiet corner. "Marcus, what you're doing is more important than you realize. There's an entire ecosystem of supernatural entities living in East Texas, and most of them have needs that can't be met through normal channels. They need specialized supplies, custom equipment, biological materials that don't exist in the regular world. So we're like supernatural Amazon. More than that, we're the infrastructure that keeps these entities stable and contained. Without our delivery service, they'd have to venture into the normal world to get what they need. That would expose them to discovery and potentially cause panic among the general population. And that would be bad, catastrophic. These entities have been hiding in the deep woods for generations, sometimes centuries. They've developed their own communities, their own rules, their own ways of existing alongside humanity without causing harm. But if they were discovered and forced into the open," she didn't need to finish. "I could imagine the chaos that would follow if the general public learned that vampires, shapeshifters, collective consciousness entities, and things even stranger were living in the forests of East Texas. So the rules aren't just to protect me, they're to protect everyone. The entities, the local communities, and the delicate balance that's been maintained for decades." I was beginning to understand that my job wasn't just about delivering packages. I was part of a system that kept two worlds, the normal and the supernatural, from colliding in ways that would destroy both. But I was also beginning to realize that some of the entities I served weren't as benign as Dr. Vasquez made them sound. The collective was actively recruiting new members. Blackwood collected people like specimens, and somewhere out in the woods were things that were far worse than either of them. The question was, how long could I keep following the rules before the rules stopped being enough to protect me? I was about to find out because the package that would test every rule I'd learned was already being prepared for delivery. And this time, there would be no gray areas, no room for interpretation. This time, I would have to choose between following the rules and saving someone's life. And that choice would change everything. The call came in at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in December. My phone rang with that harsh, jarring sound that only emergency calls seem to make, pulling me out of deep sleep and into instant alertness. "Marcus." It was Bill's voice, but he sounded different, scared in a way I'd never heard before. "Yeah, I'm here. What's wrong?" "We need you to come in." "No. There's been a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The kind that breaks rules." 20 minutes later, I was standing in the depot surrounded by more people than I'd ever seen there after hours. Bill was pacing behind his desk. Dr. Vasquez was studying something on her laptop, and 3 people I didn't recognize were huddled in the corner speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "What's going on?" I asked. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her screen, her face grim. "We received an emergency request tonight. A package needs to be delivered to Morning Dove Circle, but there are complications." "The collective? What kind of complications?" "The package contains a person." My blood went cold. "What do you mean, a person?" Bill stopped pacing and turned to face me. Amy Chin, 22 years old, college student from Tyler. She went missing 3 days ago after visiting some friends in Marshall. Her car was found abandoned on Highway 43, about 10 miles from Morning Dove Circle. "And you think the collective took her?" "We know they did," Dr. Vasquez said. "They called our emergency line 6 hours ago. They're offering to return her, but only through our delivery system. She'll be packaged and labeled for delivery to her home address in Tyler." The implications were staggering. They want me to deliver a human being like she's a package? "It's not that simple," Dr. Vasquez said. "The collective has specific requirements for how they interact with the outside world. They can't simply drive her home or call the police. Their psychological conditioning won't allow direct contact with normal society anymore. So they're using us as intermediaries." "Exactly. But here's the problem. They're scheduling the pickup for tomorrow night, after 6 p.m. Rule 1. Never deliver packages to addresses that don't exist on your GPS after 6 p.m. And Amy's home address in Tyler isn't in the system," I said, understanding immediately. "Right? The delivery would violate Rule 1 directly. But if we don't make the pickup, Amy Chin dies. The collective has made that very clear." I slumped into a chair, the weight of the situation crushing down on me. "What about the other rules? Will this delivery violate any of them?" Dr. Vasquez consulted her notes. "Potentially several. The package will definitely make sounds. Amy will be conscious and probably trying to communicate. That's Rule 3. It might feel unnaturally cold if the collective uses their standard preservation methods. That's Rule 2. And she hesitated. "And what?" "There's a strong possibility that Amy has been partially converted. The collective has had her for 3 days, which is enough time for them to begin the consciousness integration process. She may not be entirely human anymore." Rule 6. Never deliver packages to someone who died more than a year ago. "But what about delivering someone who is no longer entirely alive?" "Why me?" I asked. "Why not send another driver? Someone with more experience?" Bill's expression grew troubled. "Because the collective specifically requested you. They said they trust your discretion and professionalism." "Trust me. I've delivered to them exactly once. That one delivery made an impression," Dr. Vasquez said. "You followed the rules, maintained proper protocol, and didn't ask too many questions. They view you as reliable. And if I refuse?" The 3 strangers in the corner looked up at this question. One of them, a woman in her 50s with graying hair, stepped forward. "My name is Linda Chin," she said. "Amy is my daughter." My heart sank. This wasn't just about rules and supernatural protocols anymore. This was about a mother who wanted her daughter back. "Mrs. Chin, I understand how difficult this must be." "Do you?" she interrupted. "Do you understand what it's like to have your child disappear, to have the police tell you there are no leads, no evidence, no hope? And then to have these people call you and say they have her, but she can only come home if you work with entities that shouldn't exist." I looked around the room at all the faces watching me, waiting for my decision. Bill, who'd been managing supernatural deliveries for decades. Dr. Vasquez, who dedicated her career to studying these entities. Linda Chin, who just wanted her daughter back. And in the corner, 2 other people who looked like they might be federal agents, though nobody had introduced them. "What happens if I break the rules to make this delivery?" I asked. "What are the consequences?" Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances with Bill. "We don't know for certain. The contract between UPS and the supernatural community has never been violated for humanitarian reasons. Previous rule violations were due to curiosity, carelessness, or greed. But this is different. This is someone trying to save a life. The entities might view that as acceptable grounds for contract modification, or they might view it as unacceptable breach and void the entire agreement," Bill added grimly. "Which would mean Open season on anyone who's ever worked the supernatural routes. No protection, no rules, no boundaries. Every driver, every depot worker, every person who's been exposed to this world would become fair game for entities looking for new hosts, servants, or specimens. The weight of responsibility was crushing. I wasn't just risking my own life. I was potentially endangering everyone who'd ever been involved in maintaining the balance between the human and supernatural worlds. There has to be another way, I said. One of the federal agents spoke up for the first time. We've explored other options. Military extraction, negotiation through diplomatic channels, even offering the collective alternative compensation. They've refused everything except delivery through established protocols. Diplomatic channels? You people have diplomatic relations with supernatural entities. Certain branches of the government have been aware of the East Texas supernatural community for decades, the agent said. We have informal agreements that allow them to exist peacefully in exchange for staying hidden and avoiding contact with the general population. And those agreements depend on the delivery system working properly, Dr. Vasquez added. Break the system, and the entire détente collapses. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark parking lot. Somewhere out in the pine forests, a young woman was trapped with entities that weren't entirely human anymore. Her mother was sitting behind me, waiting for me to decide whether her daughter was worth risking the supernatural peace that protected millions of people. What do we know about Amy's condition? I asked. Is she hurt? Is she still herself? Linda Chin answered. When they called, I was allowed to speak to her briefly. She sounded tired, confused, but she knew who I was. She said they were treating her well, but that she felt different, like she was sharing space in her own head. Sharing space. The same phrase Dr. Vasquez had used to describe what happened to people who joined the collective. How much time do I have to decide? 6 hours, Bill said. The pickup is scheduled for 8 p.m. tomorrow. If we're going to do this, I need to make preparations, arrange backup protocols, notify our contacts in the supernatural community. I closed my eyes and tried to think clearly. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this was insane, that risking the entire supernatural balance for one person was wrong. But every human part of me knew that I couldn't let Amy Chin die because of rules and regulations. What kind of backup protocols? I asked. Dr. Vasquez pulled out a folder thick with documents. We've been preparing for a situation like this for years. Emergency procedures, alternative delivery methods, contingency plans for rule violations. You've planned for this. We've planned for the possibility of necessary rule violations. Humanitarian situations, natural disasters, direct threats to the supernatural community. The rules are important, but they're not more important than human life. Bill nodded. The problem is, we've never had to implement these protocols. We don't know if they'll work or if the entities will accept them as valid modifications to our contract. But you think there's a chance? There's a chance, Dr. Vasquez said. The supernatural community isn't inherently evil. They understand concepts like mercy, necessity, and the preservation of life. They might be willing to grant a one-time exception if we follow proper procedures. What procedures? She opened the folder and began spreading documents across the table. First, we formally notify all major entities in the region about the emergency situation and request temporary suspension of Rule 1. Second, we provide alternative compensation to any entities who might be affected by the rule violation. Third, we limit the violation to the absolute minimum necessary to complete the humanitarian mission. Alternative compensation, additional services, priority deliveries, access to specialized supplies they wouldn't normally be able to obtain. I studied the documents, trying to understand the complex negotiations that would be required. And if they refuse, then we proceed anyway and deal with the consequences, Bill said firmly. Because some things are more important than rules. Linda Chin looked up at this, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since I'd met her. Mrs. Chin, I said, I need you to understand something. If I do this, if I break the rules to bring Amy home, there's a very real possibility that she won't be the same person who was taken. The collective may have changed her in ways that can't be undone. I understand, she said quietly, but she'll be alive, and she'll be home. That's all I care about. I looked around the room one more time, at all the faces depending on my decision. Then I thought about Amy Chin, trapped with entities that were slowly stealing her humanity, and about her mother, who'd been waiting 3 days for any word about her daughter's fate. All right, I said, let's break some rules. The next 18 hours were a whirlwind of preparation and negotiation. Dr. Vasquez contacted every major supernatural entity in East Texas, explaining the situation and requesting permission for a humanitarian rule violation. Bill worked with UPS management to arrange official backing for the mission. The federal agents handled logistics and contingency planning. Most of the entities were surprisingly understanding. Mrs. Sawyer agreed to the rule violation in exchange for priority delivery of her temperature regulation supplies. Dr. Voss offered to provide medical support if Amy needed treatment after her return. Even Blackwood sent word that he found the situation intellectually fascinating and wouldn't interfere. The one holdout was the collective itself. Their concern about precedent, Dr. Vasquez explained as we loaded the truck for what might be my final delivery. If we break rules for humanitarian reasons once, what's to stop us from doing it again? They're worried about the stability of the entire system, but they're the ones requesting the delivery. They want Amy delivered according to standard protocols. No exceptions, no modifications. They're willing to release her, but only if we prove that our commitment to the rules is absolute. It was a test. The collective was forcing us to choose between saving Amy and maintaining the system that protected everyone else. There's one more thing, Dr. Vasquez said, handing me a modified GPS unit. We've programmed Amy's home address into this device. Technically, if the address exists in a GPS system, Rule 1 doesn't apply. That seems like cheating. It's creative interpretation. The rules don't specify which GPS system we have to use. As evening approached, I drove toward Morning Dove Circle with my truck equipped with every protection and backup system Dr. Vasquez could think of. The silver pendant around my neck felt warm against my skin. Multiple GPS units showed different versions of reality. And in the back of my truck was a specially modified container designed to safely transport a partially converted human being. The sun was setting as I reached the circle of identical houses around the lake. This time, all 13 houses were brightly lit, and I could see figures moving behind the windows. The collective was fully active, all members focused on the task of releasing their prisoner. The woman who answered the door at House 13 was different from the one I'd met before, but her eyes held the same too bright stare. "You're precisely on time," she said. "We appreciate punctuality. I'm here for the pickup." Of course. Amy is prepared for transport. She led me around to the back of the house, where a large shipping container sat on the porch. It was the kind of container used for international freight, but modified with air holes and internal padding. "She's inside?" I asked. "She's comfortable. We've ensured she has adequate air, water, and space for the journey. She's also been given mild sedatives to prevent panic during transport." I could hear faint sounds from inside the container, movement, maybe soft crying. Amy Chen was alive in there, and she was scared. "The delivery address," the woman asked. I showed her the modified GPS unit, 1247 Oak Street, Tyler, Texas. Her family home. The woman studied the device with those unnaturally bright eyes. "This address didn't exist in your previous GPS system. We upgraded our equipment for this delivery." For a long moment, she stared at the GPS screen, and I could sense some kind of internal communication happening within the collective. All 13 members were linked, sharing information and making decisions together. Finally, she nodded. "The address is acceptable. Rule 1 is satisfied. What about Rule 3? The package is making sounds. Amy has been instructed to remain as quiet as possible during transport. Any sounds will be minimal and non-threatening. And Rule 2, will the container be cold? We've maintained her at normal human body temperature. No special handling is required." They've thought of everything. The collective had prepared for this delivery while staying technically within the bounds of our rules. They were testing the system without breaking it. "There is one additional requirement," the woman said as I began loading the container into my truck. "This delivery must be completed before midnight. If you arrive at the destination after that time, the container must be returned to us unopened." "Why midnight?" "Because that's when Amy's conversion becomes irreversible. After midnight, she belongs to us permanently." I checked my watch, 8:30 p.m. Tyler was almost 2 hours away, and I'd be driving back roads in the dark. It would be close, but possible. "I understand," I said. "Then transport our gift safely, Marcus. And remember, some rules are more important than others." As I drove away from Morning Dove Circle, I could hear Amy moving around inside the container. She was trying to be quiet, but I could tell she was awake and alert. Every few minutes, she would knock softly on the container walls, and I would knock back to let her know I was there. "Amy," I called out during a straight stretch of road. "Can you hear me?" "Yes," came a muffled voice from the back of the truck. "Are you taking me home?" "I'm taking you to your mother. We'll be there soon." They said I might not want to go home anymore. That I might choose to stay with them. My blood chilled. "Do you want to stay with them?" There was a long pause. "I don't know. It's hard to think clearly. There are voices in my head that aren't mine, and sometimes they make sense. Sometimes I think they might be right about things." The conversion process was already underway. Amy was fighting it, but the collective had planted seeds of their consciousness in her mind. If I didn't get her home before midnight, those seeds would take root permanently. I pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing the truck faster than was safe on the winding country roads. We had to make it. We had to get Amy back to her family before she decided she didn't want to be saved. But as we raced through the East Texas darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that the collective had planned for this too. They'd given us just enough time to succeed, but not enough margin for error. And in the back of my truck, Amy Chan was slowly losing her battle against voices that promised her something better than human existence. The clock on my dashboard read 11:15 p.m. when we reached the Tyler city limits. We were going to make it, but barely. Now I just had to hope that the person I delivered would still be the daughter Linda Chen was waiting for. The Chen family home was a modest 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where the biggest excitement was usually a high school football game or a community barbecue. Tonight, it was the destination for the strangest delivery in UPS history. I pulled into the driveway at 11:43 p.m., 17 minutes to spare. The porch light was on, and I could see figures moving behind the living room curtains. Linda Chen had been waiting, probably pacing the floor since sunset. Before I could even turn off the engine, the front door flew open. Linda Chen rushed out, followed by Dr. Vasquez, Bill, and the 2 federal agents. Behind them came a man I assumed was Amy's father, and a teenage boy who had to be her brother. "Is she?" Linda began, but couldn't finish the question. "She's alive," I said, climbing out of the truck, "but she's been affected by whatever the collective did to her. She may not be entirely herself." I opened the back of the truck and began carefully sliding out the shipping container. It was heavier than I'd expected, and I could hear Amy moving around inside. "Amy," Linda called out. "Amy, honey, can you hear me?" "Mom." The voice from inside the container was Amy's, but there was something different about it. A slight echo, like she wasn't speaking alone. "We're going to get you out of there, sweetie. Just hold on." Dr. Vasquez examined the container's locking mechanism. It's designed to open from the outside only. Standard shipping protocol to prevent tampering during transport. She produced a set of tools and began working on the locks. As she did, I noticed something strange happening to the neighborhood around us. The streetlights were flickering, dogs were barking in the distance, and several house lights had come on as neighbors peered out their windows. "Is this normal?" I asked Bill quietly. "Supernatural entities create disturbances in electrical systems," he explained. "If Amy has been partially converted, she might be generating an energy field." The first lock clicked open. "Amy, we're almost there," Linda said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Mom, there are voices in my head," Amy replied, her words slightly muffled by the container walls. "They're telling me things. They say I don't have to be just Amy anymore. I can be part of something bigger." Dr. Vasquez paused in her work, exchanging worried glances with Bill. The conversion process was more advanced than we'd hoped. The second lock opened. "That's not true, honey," Linda said, fighting back tears. "You're Amy Chin. You're my daughter. You're a college student studying biology. You want to be a veterinarian and help animals. Remember?" "I remember," Amy said, but her voice was growing more distant. "But I also remember things that aren't mine. Lives I've never lived, knowledge I've never learned. It's beautiful, Mom. They showed me what it's like to be connected to something eternal." The third and final lock clicked open. "Step back," Dr. Vasquez warned. "We don't know what condition she's in or how the conversion might have affected her physically." I checked my watch, 11:52 p.m. 8 minutes until midnight. 8 minutes before Amy's choice became permanent. Dr. Vasquez slowly opened the container. Amy Chin sat inside, very much alive but fundamentally changed. She looked like herself, same brown hair, same kind eyes, same delicate features, but there was something else there now. Her eyes held depths they'd never had before, and when she moved, it was with a fluid grace that seemed almost otherworldly. "Hi, Mom," she said, smiling as she climbed out of the container. "I missed you." Linda rushed forward and wrapped her daughter in a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Amy, my baby girl." I was so scared, but as they embraced, I noticed Amy's expression. She was hugging her mother back, but her eyes were scanning the neighborhood with an intensity that made my skin crawl. She was evaluating, analyzing, looking for something. "How do you feel, honey?" Amy's father asked, stepping forward cautiously. "Different," Amy said simply. "Better in some ways. I can think more clearly than I ever have before. I can sense things about people, understand their motivations, their fears. It's like seeing the world in color after a lifetime of black and white." Dr. Vasquez was monitoring Amy with some kind of handheld device. "Her electromagnetic signature is off the charts," she whispered to Bill. "The conversion is much more advanced than we expected." "Amy," I said, stepping closer, "the collective told you that you had to choose, didn't they? They said if you weren't delivered by midnight, you belonged to them permanently." She nodded, still holding her mother's hand. "They did say that, and I've been thinking about it during the drive, about what I want to choose." The entire group went silent. In the distance, a church bell began tolling midnight. "I choose." Amy paused, her eyes growing unfocused as if she was listening to voices only she could hear. "I choose to be both." "Both?" Linda asked, confusion and fear creeping into her voice. "I choose to be Amy Chin, daughter, sister, student. But I also choose to be part of the collective. I don't have to give up who I am to gain what they offer." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward urgently. "Amy, that's not how it works. The conversion process requires complete integration. You can't exist as both human and collective member." "But I can," Amy said with certainty that was chilling in its absoluteness. "They show me how. They showed me that the rules everyone follows aren't the only rules that exist." The church bell finished tolling midnight. Amy's eyes suddenly flashed with that too bright light I'd seen in the collective members, but only for a moment. When they returned to normal, she was still clearly herself, but enhanced. "I'm still your daughter," she said to her parents. "I'm still Amy, but I'm also more than that now. I can be a bridge between worlds, help others understand that cooperation is better than fear." Linda looked at Dr. Vasquez desperately. "Is she safe? Is she still human?" "I'm as human as I ever was," Amy answered before Dr. Vasquez could respond. "But I'm also connected to something larger. Think of it as evolution, not replacement." One of the federal agents spoke up. "What does this mean for the supernatural community? What does this mean for the rules?" Amy smiled, and for the first time since climbing out of the container, she looked entirely like herself. "It means the rules are changing. It means cooperation is replacing isolation. And it means that the old boundaries between human and supernatural are becoming more flexible." She turned to me. "Marcus, you broke Rule 1 to save me, but you also found a way to follow it by using a different GPS system. You proved that the rules can evolve without being destroyed." "But what about the contract?" Bill asked. "What about our agreement with the supernatural community?" "The contract is still valid," Amy said, "but it's going to include new provisions. Provisions for emergency situations, for humanitarian missions, for cooperative ventures between human and supernatural entities." Dr. Vasquez was frantically taking notes. "This is unprecedented. A successful partial conversion that maintains individual identity while creating a bridge consciousness. The implications are staggering." "It's what needs to happen," Amy said simply. "The old way, complete separation, rigid rules, fear-based isolation, it wasn't sustainable. Both communities were suffering from the disconnection." As we talked, I noticed that the neighborhood disturbances had stopped. The streetlights were steady, the dogs had quieted, and the electrical interference had disappeared. Whatever Amy had become, she was stable. "So what happens now?" I asked. Amy looked at her family, then at me, then at the UPS truck that had brought her home. "Now I go back to college and finish my degree," she said. "But I also serve as a liaison between the collective and the human world. I help other people who might benefit from what they offer, and I make sure that everyone understands the choices they're making." "And the delivery routes?" Bill asked. "What happens to drivers like Marcus?" The routes continue, but they get safer. With better communication between communities, there will be fewer misunderstandings, fewer dangerous situations. The rules will still exist, but there'll be guidelines for cooperation rather than barriers to prevent contact. Linda Chen looked at her daughter with a mixture of love and uncertainty. "Are you happy, Amy? Is this what you really want?" Amy hugged her mother again, and this time her expression was purely human, a young woman who loved her family and was grateful to be home. "I'm happy, Mom. I'm more myself than I've ever been, and I'm part of something wonderful. I can help people, both human and supernatural. It's exactly what I want." As the family headed into the house, Dr. Vasquez pulled me aside. "You realize what you've accomplished here, don't you?" she said. "You've facilitated the first successful human-supernatural hybrid in recorded history. Amy could be the key to transforming relationships between our communities." "Is she safe?" I asked. "Will she be okay?" "I think she'll be better than okay. I think she's going to change the world." The next morning, I reported to the depot expecting to be fired, prosecuted, or worse. Instead, I found Bill and Dr. Vasquez waiting for me with smiles on their faces. "Congratulations," Bill said, shaking my hand. "You've been promoted to Regional Coordinator for Supernatural Human Relations," Dr. Vasquez explained. "Amy's transformation has opened up possibilities we never imagined. We need someone with your experience and judgment to help manage the transition." "What transition?" "The integration," Bill said. "Other supernatural communities across Texas have heard about what happened with Amy and the collective. They want to explore similar cooperative arrangements. We need drivers who can handle the new types of deliveries that will require." "New types of deliveries?" Dr. Vasquez grinned. "Information packages, cultural exchange materials, and occasionally, people who want to experience temporary supernatural enhancement. It's going to be a whole new world, Marcus." Over the following months, everything changed. The rigid rules that had governed supernatural deliveries for decades were replaced by flexible guidelines that emphasized communication and cooperation. New training programs were developed for drivers who would be working with hybrid entities like Amy. Emergency protocols were refined and tested. Most importantly, the fear that had separated human and supernatural communities began to dissolve. Not completely, there were still dangerous entities that required careful handling, but the atmosphere of mutual terror was replaced by cautious cooperation. Amy Chen became the first official human-supernatural liaison, helping other people who chose partial conversion or temporary enhancement. She finished her degree and opened a veterinary practice that served both normal animals and the cryptid species that Dr. Voss had been caring for in secret. The collective evolved too, becoming less of an isolated group mind and more of a network of individuals who could share consciousness when needed while maintaining their personal identities. They established a formal embassy in Tyler and began accepting visitors who wanted to learn about collective consciousness experiences. Mrs. Sawyer started a support group for people with supernatural temperature regulation needs. Blackwood opened a consulting firm that helped researchers understand supernatural phenomena. Dr. Voss expanded her wildlife rehabilitation center and began training conventional veterinarians to work with cryptid species. As for me, I kept delivering packages. But now my route included stops at integration centers, hybrid communities, and cooperative research facilities. My truck carried supplies for scientific studies, communication devices for long-distance supernatural relationships, and occasionally, people who were choosing to transform themselves in ways that would have been unimaginable just months before. The 8 rules still existed, but they'd been joined by new guidelines. Rule 9. Always respect the choices of entities seeking integration or separation. Rule 10. Communication and consent are required before any supernatural interaction. Rule 11. Emergency humanitarian situations override standard protocols. Rule 12. Integration services require specialized training and certification. I still carried the laminated cards in my truck, but now they were reminders of how much things had changed rather than rigid survival instructions. The supernatural world was no longer hidden in the deep woods of East Texas. It was becoming part of the larger community, one carefully managed delivery at a time. And sometimes late at night when I'm driving those same country roads where this all began, I think about how one decision to break the rules changed everything. How choosing to save Amy Chen didn't destroy the system, it transformed it into something better. The packages I deliver now are different. They're not just supplies for isolated entities hiding from the world. The materials for building bridges between communities that have been separated by fear and misunderstanding for generations. It's still dangerous work. There are still entities that can't or won't integrate with human society. There are still rules that exist for good reasons, and breaking them still has consequences. But now there's hope where there used to be only fear. There's cooperation where there used to be only isolation. And there are 8 rules that taught me the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most important thing you can deliver isn't a package. Sometimes it's a choice. And sometimes when you make the right choice, you don't just save one person. You save 2 worlds.